This is Ron Peters.
I'm John Nugent.
And I'm Sam Long.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
after class.
Thanks for joining us. Another episode of the After Class Podcast. Glad to have you along. Happy July 4th to our listeners, although this episode will not be dropping till many weeks after July 4th.
But July 4th a couple weeks ago
it's
for you.
July 3rd for us, and so that's when we're recording, and so that's what we're doing. So if you hear various explosions in the background, we're not in some sort of armed conflict. It's just people blowing up stuff to celebrate something.
People are trying to attack us for being advocates of nonviolence.
Yeah, exactly.
We know how to handle those guys. We'll just blow them up. So doing anything for... Independence Day, 4th of July celebration.
Taking a nap, probably. Our church is hosting a couple of parties, so I'll be going to one of those. There'll be swimming. I doubt I will be doing that. I'll probably play jarts and, avoid sparkler burns.
Big time. It seems like napping is how you celebrate a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right.
And that's not a complaint.
No better way.
It's just an observation.
Yeah.
We're going to come over, probably going to be right here on campus tonight. We like to watch the Sharp Park fireworks. And so we've always hung out like at a cafe or whatever. And I've kind of come to loathe the cafes that are really close, except for the Brew, but they're closed. And so
That was a good disclaimer.
I know, right?
Clarification.
Yeah, I want to make everybody aware of the fact that the Brew is still very, very high on my list of liked cafes. So anyway, they're not open. So we're just probably going to set up some chairs here. We've got some family who will come with us, and we'll watch the fireworks from here. And then tomorrow, we'll just hang out at our house. We'll probably grill and have people over. And again, it'll just be like family and friend time.
Nice.
No big plans.
I'll be at the other church party that Sam was talking about. So it's kind of fun. We're a network of house churches, and we used to have one big 4th of July party. It was usually at my house. I have a pool and stuff like that. But, now we're big enough, we're over 100 people, where we need 2 4th of July parties.
Yeah, right.
Because it's just too many people in one spot. And so, and fortunately, we have 2 pools in the church. So,
oh, nice.
So, we'll be hosting that tonight. Although we started early because last night, my neighbor, I have brand new neighbors, and they spent a lot of money on fireworks.
Oh, wow.
And last night, they set them off in 5 feet from my property line.
Right.
So it was like right in my backyard. So I got to watch probably a $700-800 fireworks display.
Oh, wow.
In my backyard. So it was pretty surreal. But tonight, so we're having a big party, and everyone will come who can from our church, and then we'll, like we usually do, at 8:30 start walking to Sharp Park.
Okay, yeah.
So we're going to be watching the same fireworks that you're watching, but we walk to the park and kind of sit really close to where they're shooting them off and kind of stare up in the sky and, I don't know, bombs bursting in air. So it's a fitting holiday celebration in light of our series.
Yes.
Yes, explosions and everything. I mean, in a way, I hate the 4th of July just because of the noise. Noise. I know. I feel like the Grinch in a way. And there are many reasons I want to move out to the country, and one of them is that it's just quieter out there.
Yes.
Because tonight and tomorrow night especially, well past midnight, there's just going to be people lighting up all kind of stuff. And I don't care for it.
Some of it even fireworks.
So you're right, yeah. Firing guns into the air, it's going to be like a scene from an old Western movie. And I don't care for exploding things. They don't I'm not like a dog where I want to hide under the couch or something like that. I'm just like, I don't really care for it.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I used to love it, and then I have a dog that's deathly afraid and freaks out, and love it less now.
Right, that makes sense. But you like things that blow up, huh?
Yeah, I like the closer I can be to it, the better.
Wow.
It's fun when the shrapnel falls on you and stuff like that. Feels real.
Love those burns.
And I love what are they, the M80s, or what are the ones that go really hard?
Yeah, I mean, M80s are really, really loud.
Yeah,
so.
those are my favorites when they just do a ton of those.
When you feel that concussive thing against you, right?
That's that's the thing.
Oh, wow.
That's the feeling. So, we'll be doing that.
Yeah, see, I like quiet.
And you and I have a coffee date soon.
That's right. We do have a coffee date.
Yeah, I turned 50 a few days ago.
Yes.
So it is time for Ron to try to help me acquire a taste for coffee.
Yeah. I got to order the one coffee that I want you to try, so not a big deal. It's just over in Grand Rapids, but the coffee I want you to start on, I'll have to order it in. I have to clean my coffee pot really well so it's not tainted by other coffees. And all that kind of stuff. Like just create the ultimate coffee sampling experience, like a cupping experience like they do in professional situations.
Huh. Excellent. Well, I look forward to that.
As do I.
In the meantime, we have an episode to record.
Yes, we do.
And we have 3 episodes to record today.
Yep. Marathon.
So it's going to be a marathon day, so we're going to jump right into it. And we've paced ourselves so that we have news to start each episode with. So I know because there are some people who don't like it when we don't have news, and we just jump right into business. And some people
there are
wish we would
others,
do that.
like myself.
Some just want to go right into business. So
I don't know. I like the easing in with some news and some goofing off at the beginning. That's just a great way to start it.
well, it does kind of loosen the tongue and get you
Yeah.
talking. It feels less wooden.
I agree.
I think when you just start into the verse.
I agree with that.
But Sam, let's start into the verses.
Fine. Should we mention what we're actually doing?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Why don't you do that?
So we started a series on how the Bible deals with violence, and we started talking about different ways of approaching it, and we talked about the pre-Torah, about what that basically we learned early on that God doesn't want people to die, and God is not for death, and so there are various ways where it's definitely decried. There are ways to sort of counteract the effects of it, and and of course we have the Ten Commandments. We have "You shall not kill or murder," and so there are lots of things we've looked at already. Lots more to go. We have many pages of verses, so we will. Anything to add before we jump in?
Just so we got a lot to talk about.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. I would add just a qualifier. When we're talking about violence, we're talking about forceful hurting other people. And that's a narrow slice of the bigger field of violence, where, violence can be spoken of in terms of when you violate someone,
Oh,
right?
right,
So you
yeah.
can violate someone's dignity through, economic policy. Like even the prophets will talk about violence in terms of the economic structures that hurt people and force people into debt slavery or cult prostitution or, anything like that, or just any kind of prostitution for money. Or verbal violence, or sexual violence. Not as strong as something like rape. Of course, that's obviously one of the most intense forms of violence that leave people alive, right? But there are other ways of being sexually violent with words and with structures and things like that. So we don't have that broadest sense of the term violence. Things that violate the dignity of the person of the other. That would be 90% of the Bible, right?
Right.
Exactly.
But we're talking specifically about killing and intentionally causing injury to others. And I think that was the spirit of the question that was brought to us.
Right.
Hey, what should I do when someone breaks into my house? Or
Right.
is it okay to kill for the country or something like that?
Yeah.
So that's the way we're framing it. And I put that out there just because I've been asked to write a book review for Stone Campbell Journal, and I'm doing this field guide to Christian nonviolence, and it has 8 different approaches to violence, and I'm like, yeah, that's not at all what we're doing.
Right.
We're not
Yeah.
nearly as comprehensive as what the field is. So I thought I'd add that little disclaimer.
Good point.
All right. So we'll start with one in Numbers chapter 35, and the context: if someone kills another, and it's called murder, and they say the murderer shall be put to death, and that's kind of it. In fact, it says there's no ransom for the murderer. There's nothing. If you kill someone, the result is the death penalty. And as it goes along, it says in verse 33, it kind of gives some of the rationale for it. It says, "You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and no expiation can be made for the land, for the blood that is shed in it, except by the blood of the one who shed it. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in which I also dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell among the Israelites." And it's kind of this interesting thing where pollution, the actual land is polluted because of murder, and the blood that then it's almost like the blood goes into the land and destroys it, and that's kind of a fascinating way to look at it. And he makes it clear there's no making up for it except for the blood of the person who took it. This is a classic eye for an eye. But life for life. And the only way in which the the pollution stops is by taking the life of the murderer. And the reason also is that we don't want to defile the land because God is here. And this is all in the context of we want God to be in our midst, and God's not going to be surrounded by a defiled land. I'm sure there's some sort of other illustration we could have for that, but like it's not going to stay there. It's going to go away. God's going to go away because of the violence, and so it reinforces these ideas of there are serious consequences for murder and for killing, and uses the idea of the land as an illustration of that.
Well, the pre-Israelite passages that we read a couple weeks ago really illustrate that, because it's the same thing that came out. When Cain killed Abel, his blood had defiled the land, and it affected Cain's ability to work the land and all that. So.
Did you say it came out or came out? It's not good.
Very well played.
No, it's not.
Wow, that was really reaching on that one.
I know. I'm fine.
But you got to put the joke out there. If it lands, great. If it doesn't, then that's the way it goes.
It landed on the ground.
Maybe it landed awkwardly, but it landed nonetheless.
In a pile of poop on the ground. It's fine. Everything's fine.
But there's another passage that goes into greater depth about this. Like, if the land is defiled and it will only be defiled by the blood of the one who shed it, then it raises the question: well, what do you do if you find a body that's dead, but you don't know who killed him? So Ron's going to read another passage from Deuteronomy 21.
Yep, this is Deuteronomy 21. It's a longer passage, verses 1 through 9. So it begins, if in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess, a body is found lying in the open country, and it is not known who struck the person down, then your elders and your judges shall come out to measure the distances to the towns that are near the body. So whoever's closest, right? Closest town. Everybody's like, man, I hope it's not us. This is going to be a big process. Let it be somebody else who's closer. The elders of the town nearest the body shall take a heifer that has never been worked, one that is not pulled in the yoke. The elders of that town shall bring the heifer down to a wadi with running water, which is neither plowed nor sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there in the wadi. Then the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come forward, for the Lord your God has chosen them to minister to him and to pronounce blessings in the name of the Lord. And by their decision all cases of dispute and assault shall be settled. All the elders of that town nearest the body shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the wadi, and they shall declare, our hands did not shed this blood, nor were we witnesses to it. Absolve, O Lord, your people Israel, whom you redeemed. Do not let the guilt of innocent blood remain in the midst of your people Israel. Then you will be absolved of blood guilt. You shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from your midst, because you must do what is right in the sight of the Lord. So now we've got a situation where you don't have a clear murderer. And I think that it seems like almost the assumption is this person was killed in a sort of nefarious situation. It's not like he was just walking down the street and had a stroke or something like that and died.
Yeah.
Like there is some concern that this was a murder, and you just have no way of establishing who the guilty party is. And so somehow there has to be a process in place to purge the land of the guilt, because blood pollutes the land, as we've seen over and over again. How do we do that? Well, God gives them a process where they can say, we have no idea how this happened, but God, we care enough about what you care about that we want to be cleansed in your sight from this thing. And so they do it. They break the neck of the heifer, wash their hands. They go through this whole process in order to absolve themselves from any residual guilt that might be there.
Yeah. I mean, to me, this is a pretty powerful passage, maybe one of the strongest ones in the Bible about violence. Because for us, when we think about violence and someone who kills someone, like obviously everyone thinks that's wrong, but for us, it's like it's wrong on a personal level. It's wrong because you did this heinous thing by killing someone, and it's important that you pay the price, and that is important to God, right? In the previous passage, it talked about like only the life of the one who shed the blood, can be taken to atone for the blood, which is another way, again, of limiting, right? So you can't, like, take out someone's kids and wife or their whole town, like, the slaughter of the Shechemites, right? Over Dinah's rape. Like for God, it's more than just someone has to pay when they kill someone.
Yeah.
There's something about the death of a person that is something that, I don't know, like it institutes a fissure in the universe. Like the land is not okay.
Right.
The heavens are not okay.
Yeah.
Something must be done. Even if we don't have a killer, even if we don't have a clear killer, like still something needs to be done. Israel needs to walk through a ritual We have to figure out someone's going to have to do a ceremony.
Yeah.
Because peace needs to be made with God when a life is taken.
Yeah, I like the community aspect of this, and we need to we need to make things right with God as a community. We feel like, in a sense, our community bears some responsibility here, and so we need to go to God and say, God, we had no idea how this happened. We know it did happen. We're not denying the facts of the case, but we just can't find anybody to bring justice to this situation. But we as a community want to make sure that we stand right with you, that our land is good with you. It's not just us being good with you, but that our land is still good with you. And so I like it because it shows a real concern for God. People talk about, being a follower of God is having a relationship with God. I'm like, okay, that's really good. Here's a community that takes that whole relationship aspect really, really seriously and says, we're going to do whatever we have to do to make sure that this horrible crime that took place that we cannot bring justice to is not going to compromise that relationship.
And there seems to be like a strong theology of space and place here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Like, this is our land. We are responsible for it. The things that take place in it, like, it's our chunk of creation that God has given us dominion over.
Yeah.
And we have to be exemplary stewards of it.
Yeah.
And if people are being killed in it, everything is going wrong with our land. And we are responsible for making ourselves right with God about our land stewardship.
Yeah.
And you just don't hear people talk this way about killing. Killing is never a matter of what have you done to our town,
Right.
right? What have you done to the soil?
Yeah.
What have you done to this house? Like, it's always, what have you done to the family members of this person?
Yeah.
Right? It's always
Yeah.
about people.
Right.
We're obsessed with people and have no sense of the place and what this is doing. You hear more of this kind of in regard to cities, like our streets are filled with blood.
Right. I was
Yeah.
thinking that as well.
And it's kind of a very strong image. But around here, I don't hear people talk that way about it.
No, you're right. And I like what you said about that idea of what does it mean to, have dominion and stewardship and all that, because some people really recoil at the idea of having dominion. Like I've had people say, well, I don't think that word means what people think it means. And I did some research on it. And I'm like, no, it means what we think it means. Lexically, the word means have dominion. But people think people read it as giving them permission to use the land however they want. That we can abuse the land and take what we want from it and, just do horrible things. And they feel like that dominion language gives them permission.
Well, it sounds like domination. That's the problem.
Right. That's probably a good point.
Yeah.
And so when you said that, like to have dominion over the land, it's like, yeah, of course, it's our responsibility to kind of rule over the land. But what does that look like underneath God's authority? And it is recognition that to have dominion over this means that if anything happens to violate that land in God's eyes, our status as dominion holders means we need to fix that. We need to go to God and say, our land has been polluted. Now we want to make sure that it's made clean again. And so I think that's a really good point you made, John, about not just seeing it as a personal offense, although it is. I don't want to say that it isn't. It is. But not stopping there. If people say our streets are running with blood, well, then how do you clean up your streets? How do you take responsibility for that so that it's not just a personal offense between two families or whatever, but your entire community is now being cleansed of this horrible thing? It's good.
Yeah, I think in suburbia, you're right. We don't view it in that way, but there's plenty of stories and fiction and nonfiction where, small town USA, that's like the perfect place to live, and then a murder happens, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like everything is like ruined and broke, right? And so I think there's some sense of that, but for most of us, that's not how it works, and it's probably unfortunate.
Well, that's a good point, because I think that most of Israel is very loosely small town USA. You don't have big congregations of cities,
Right.
And so, yeah, murder is going to be a rare thing. Hopefully, hopefully. And so you're saying what you said is a very good point, that when it happens, everybody feels like, oh my gosh, what's happened here? We need to do something, not just to clean up the incident, but to bring cleanness to our community again.
Yes, that's not supposed to happen here.
Right.
Right. And I think that's supposed to be their mentality. That's not supposed to happen. People aren't supposed to be murdered.
Right.
And so we got to figure out what's going on and make it better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, we see the whole notion of if you want me to dwell here, if this is God
Right.
saying this, you need to atone for the bloodshed that takes place. And when you trace the Bible story forward, like in the book of Ezekiel, it's most dramatically portrayed. like Israel has become a place of violence, and it's not just people killing people. It's the economic violence, it's the economic exploitation, it's the haves and the have-nots, and it's the social division, and it's the stealing that happens and the manipulation. And the land is filled with violence. And what does God do? There's this whole vision of the temple, raising off the ground and leaving the land. Because God is leaving, and with God leaving, you also lose God's protection. And so
things go with it.
When God's presence and blessing leaves the land, then the Babylonians are able to just walk in and subdue the land. And even ravage the temple. Because the temple without God's presence is just a bunch of ornate stuff.
Exactly. It's just another building. A pretty building, but just another building.
So it's deeply offensive to God, it's deeply injurious to the land, and obviously deeply injurious to the people whose lives are taken and the families that are turned upside down by that. So it's just a big deal.
It is.
Our culture just talks so casually about killing. We just see it so much on TV and in the news and in the ways we entertain ourselves and the video games that we just don't realize, wow, this is like a super big deal to God. And we've made it a matter of sport, entertainment, pastime, and I wonder what God thinks about all that.
I've asked myself that very question. And I think it's an important question, as people are listening to this podcast, to think about not just do I engage in violence, but what things do I find entertaining? And am I entertained by violence? Am I watching TV shows or movies where people are getting, blown away, killed or whatever? And, the Bible has violence in it. Like, I'm not saying you can't watch something that doesn't involve violence. Sometimes that's part of storytelling. So I'm not saying to people, like, you can't ever watch a TV show that maybe somebody dies or something like that, or even maybe that involves violence. But when we look at the good guys, especially the good guys and our heroes, and it's like, yeah, man, when push comes to shove, they're willing to wipe people out. It's like, oh, is that really what I want to be?
Can you imagine a video game where every time you've killed someone, you got to stop and do a ritual act? Like, imagine Call of Duty to Torah version.
That would definitely be a different game.
Call of Torah duty.
Gotta go find a heifer somewhere.
Call of my duty to God. Oh my gosh, that would be.
Anyway, okay. So these passages we've looked at the last couple of episodes, and this is just, it's been about the big picture of the sacredness of blood, right? And in God's eyes. And that's set up in the prehistory that we did in the first week, and we see it in Torah. And one of the big questions people have is, all right, I get killing bad, but like, what if someone is like breaking into my house, right? And what if my property is being threatened? Because in America, if someone like breaks into your house, they give you a right to use violence. Right, to subdue them. And I don't know the laws particularly, but I mean, what happens if someone breaks into your house and you shoot them? Are you absolved of that?
There are certain things that have to be taken into consideration. But generally, if you shoot a person inside your house who has broken into your house, basically you're not guilty. It's, well, I can't remember what it's called. I know it's like the, man's home is his castle. I can't remember the name of the defense. It's not the castle defense, but it's something along that lines. So there's a
domicile language, probably.
Something like that. Yeah.
Well, this is one of the questions on the what would you do that people have, and why some people are probably tuning into this series. Like, how should we do things like that? So the question is, does Torah address something at that level of specificity? So obviously we've been talking about don't be a Cain killing Abel. Like, don't, but what do I do if? So it turns out we do have a law that talks about this.
And just to be clear, one
has
law.
to do with,
just one, right?
and it's not long after the Ten Commandments. People usually stop after chapter 20 of Exodus. But Exodus keeps going, turns out.
Amazingly.
Yeah.
In fact, the covenant code keeps going for 4 more chapters.
Chapter 22 deals specifically with break-in situations. And I'll start with verse 1, which talks about it's bad to break in and steal, and then get to verse 2 about what can the homeowner do about it. So 22:1, when someone steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, the thief shall pay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. The thief shall make restitution, but if unable to do so, shall be sold for the theft. When the animal, whether an ox or a donkey or sheep, is found alive in the thief's possession, the thief shall pay double. Okay, so we got to, somehow Torah has to disincentivize stealing.
Right. It's not this, you catch it, you got to give it back. It's like, okay, it's just a slap on the hand. It's
Yeah,
like,
and
no, you get caught.
So this is kind of more than eye for eye,
Yeah.
right? Like you would think like if someone stole something, they have to give it back.
Right.
But that's not what the law says. If they've stole something and they still have it, they have to give it back and, well, pay double.
Yeah.
So it's just like bad. But if you stole something and then sold it on,
You profited
on
on
Facebook
eBay?
marketplace,
Oh yeah.
then you got to pay 5 times.
Yeah.
Right. So Torah is not. They're not saying kill the thief. Right.
Correct.
First of all, right.
Right.
Like, and you hear and you see in that the sacredness of life.
Yeah.
Right. It's someone steals, they're a menace to society. Kill them.
Right.
Like that's not God's word.
Right. Yeah.
And so there are softer repercussions, but it still takes it seriously. Like community is broken when people steal from other people.
Yep.
Like sense of safety, and so there are consequences twofold and even fivefold if you're selling it. I wonder. It's kind of interesting that why like if you sell it, well, that's even worse.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's because the owner can't get it back. There's no, like if you steal something and the owner gets it back, you got to do something to make up for it. So you pay back an extra sheep to make up for it. But the owner's like, my sheep's gone. Because you don't even get the loss of the sheep. Like it's a loss of all the babies that sheep will ever produce. And you've got to think about like tipping over these dominoes, and it creates this cascade of effects. And so it's like, yeah, if it's sold or if it's eaten, then that's a big loss to the owner. And you've got to make up for that somehow.
Yeah. I also wonder like if you're selling it, then you might be using this as a business.
Yeah.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like you're kind of slick. You know how to remove all traces of it from you by selling it. It's like you feel like you've gotten away with something.
Yeah.
Like the better you get at this, the more your punishment is.
Right.
It seems like
fair.
the fivefold kind of takes it to another level. If you've just stolen it and it's in your backyard, you're stupid. Pay double.
You're not even.
But
you're not
if you're a
just a criminal,
smart
you're
thief,
dumb.
5 times. All right, but this is all to set up verse 2. If a thief is found breaking in and is beaten to death, and is, no blood guilt is
I already laughed at
incurred.
that.
But if it happens after sunrise, blood guilt is incurred.
Yeah.
Which
Yep.
is kind of interesting.
It is very interesting.
What's your assessment of what's going on here, Sam?
Well, there's a couple things. The idea is that so in the middle of the night and someone breaks in, you're defending yourself, your family, and and you can't see anything because they don't have lights. It's, I mean,
Don't
and
flip the
so
switch.
No cell phones.
whatever you're fighting whatever, and you don't know what's going on because it's dark, and so you're just defending and beating, and he ends up dying. And because of that, because you can't see what's going on, in my opinion, that's why there's like it's okay because you didn't know. But when the sun's up and you can see, you stop beating him. You don't beat him, like you can't beat him to death because you can
Right.
see right in front of you.
Right.
He's incapacitated. Like you've taken care of it. There's no need to keep beating him.
Yeah.
That was how I would look at it. Is that there's like when there's this element of unknown, then that's okay. But when it's clear and obvious, like stop. Like you don't need to beat him to death.
Yeah. And these laws are, and some people kind of, when they get to these laws, it's like, they look at them as this is what you must do.
Correct.
Like if someone breaks in the middle of the night,
You must beat them to death.
you must beat them to death, right? Or if they break in the middle of the day, you must beat them, just not to death. That's not what's going on. No.
Right, yeah.
The law is trying to say, okay, something happened last night and someone's dead.
Right.
You're on the hook for this
Correct.
death. Like there are negative repercussions for killing someone because of the sacredness of blood, and bloodshed atones the land. But if it happened in the middle of the night and like everything, like it's almost like it could have been unintentional,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Like but you couldn't see. You're just trying to protect yourself or your family or whatever, and you didn't mean to kill someone. You didn't try to kill someone.
Right.
They died by accident.
Yeah.
Like you're not violating the sanctity of the life of the killer if you're not. Unintentional killing is protected.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think the darkness puts it into the category of unintentional.
Right.
Yeah.
But if there's sunlight and you killed them, you did it on purpose.
Yeah.
And even if they're a thief, you don't get to kill a thief.
Correct.
That's not eye for eye.
That's right.
If you want to know what to do with a thief, you go to the previous verse, and it's like they pay double if they still have it. They pay fivefold if they've, sold it.
Yep.
So this is really, this is a stricter law than America. Right?
Yeah, and you made the point earlier that a law that's somewhat permissive is not a command. That's like what happened with adultery when Jesus is questioned about adultery. Can a man divorce his? I said adultery. I don't know why I said that. Divorce is what I meant to say. When Jesus is asked about divorce, can a man divorce his wife for any reason? They just look at that one passage in Deuteronomy about handing her a certificate about divorce, a certificate of divorce. I'm struggling to speak today, and they take it as a command. It's like, no, it's not a command. It's not even a good practice. And so something like this, I think, has to be viewed through the same lens, that it's not a command, this is what you do, but if you find yourself in this situation, then this is how you need to address it as a community.
Yeah, it's what you may not do.
Yeah.
You may not kill someone who breaks in.
Right.
But if
Especially
there's a struggle in the middle of the night and there's chaos and no one can see and someone dies, well, it's not your fault.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So, it definitely is different than how it's often framed.
Yeah.
If someone breaks into my house, can I shoot them? Well, this doesn't answer that question.
No, it
Right.
doesn't answer that question.
So, all right.
Yeah, but it does suggest if someone breaks in your house and you can see them, you shouldn't be shooting them lethally, at least.
At the very
at a bare
least.
minimum,
very least,
you shouldn't
right.
shoot to kill.
Right.
I mean, a Christian who is trying to live by Torah, which we're going to go beyond Torah, with Jesus and all, but if this was a letter of the law, you would be on the hook for murder if you killed a thief on purpose in Torah.
Yeah.
So look for maiming.
Shoot him in the leg.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Next passage.
Is that me?
That's you.
All right, we turn to Deuteronomy 17, and this is about kingship, about what a king should be like or not be like, but there's some implications for what this means, especially for maybe military-type violence.
Yeah. So we're switching the topic to
Yes.
talk about the army,
Yes.
right? Like some people want to know when it comes to violence in the context of military service. So, this passage is really the closest thing you'll find in Torah to what is God's approach to the military.
Yep,
I mean,
right.
the next two passages,
Yes.
not just this one, but the next couple. So,
And so in starting 17:14 of Deuteronomy, it says, when you've come to land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you've taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me. You may indeed set over you a king whom the Lord your God will choose. One of your own community you may set as king over you. You are not permitted to put a foreigner over you who is not of your own community. Even so, he must not acquire many horses for himself, or return to the people to Egypt in order to acquire more horses, since the Lord has said to you, you are never to return that way again. And he must not acquire many wives for himself, or his heart will turn, and on it goes. And the key there is the horses. Now, the reason in the ancient world you had horses was not to go horseback riding.
really?
I know. It was not a pastime. They weren't pets.
How about ponies?
Well, a little pony ride action. You going to have a pony at your 4th of July party, John?
that'd
if there's a
be-
pony on
that's
there.
probably too late.
Pony ride.
As long as it didn't come from Egypt, you're just fine. So.
Yeah. The reason you have horses is for warfare, to pull chariots or to ride on horseback and attack people. And so what he's saying for a couple of things is you don't acquire lots of horses, and you especially don't acquire them from Egypt, because we're never going back there again. And so the idea here is what we're going to find in, I think, the next grouping of passages is there's a reason why God doesn't want them to have a big army. Is because then they're not putting their faith in God. Mm-hmm. God is the one who fights for them. Not if you're putting your faith in a big, strong military, you're not putting your faith in God. And that was the problem that they had over and over again. If you read through Kings, that's screwed them over. Where they're like, "Oh, well, maybe we should make a treaty with this group and make our army bigger so that we can defend ourselves." And over, God said, "Nope, that's not how it works."
Yeah, and military power was a part of empire building. The reason Egypt was able to build they were the superpower of the ancient world, them with the Babylonians, and even the Hittite kingdoms as well, is because they were able to build these really big and technologically advanced militaries. Horses are powerful for your military because you don't just ride them into battle, you ride over people. Like horse damage is a terrifying thing. If you're just an army of men standing there with swords and you see this army coming at you of guys on horses, the guys on the horses might not even have to strike you down because those horses are going to run over you, they're going to trample you, and they're going to do a ton of damage. And so a cavalry like that is a terrifying thing in the ancient world. And so it goes beyond just even defending yourself, although it's a good point. I think you're absolutely right, Sam. You're not supposed to be an empire builder like these nations around you. I am giving you the land, the Lord says, and here are the boundaries for that land. And so you don't need to go out there and expand your territory by building an army, because empires build their territory through violence and by overpowering their enemies. And that's just not what I set you up to be.
And also changes the way they do warfare. Like in the work, you would lead with horses, right? They're the first ones in to like trample a bunch of people, right?
Yep.
I don't know if you read Joshua lately, but the first group that went is a bunch of priests and an ark, a box. The gold box goes first. No one can stop that.
Go box, go box,
Like,
go box.
And no, and like it would have been. I mean, it would have been ludicrous. Like imagine if you were in Jericho looking down. And the first thing you see is, a bunch of guys in turbans and a gold box, and like, what is this? What are these yahoos? Right?
Can't wait for them to
no one's armed. I mean, they're just
walking around.
a bunch of priests.
Can't wait to get our hands on that gold box.
And so the Levites actually were the first line, right? They're the first responders. Well, what's the military term? The ones who go in first. Anyway, but that's who. But they weren't going to fight because
they're walking point.
Yes, they were leading with the expectation that God's the one that's going to do the fighting. Yeah. And so it's just fascinating. We're like, another reason why you don't need horses is because we got priests in a box, and so we're fine.
But I mean, you're gonna say something?
Yeah, I think this is part of a wider thing. Like Torah, people read Torah, it's like, oh my goodness, all the details of all the things Israel has, and laws about where to go to the bathroom, and how to clean your utensils, and how to deal with sicknesses. I mean, Deuteronomy, and this section of Deuteronomy particularly, is like kind of like Israel's constitution, right?
Yeah.
Like their laws, their provisions, and what is conspicuously absent is any set of laws about having a stand-in army.
Right.
Yeah.
Like having a king is not desirable. Right?
First of all,
because Israel's God, is their king, but they said, but when you get in the land, you're going to want to appoint one, and there are limits on what he can do, and and these limitations basically say you can't be a king like the nations have kings, and you can't be going to the nearby nations and acquiring military arsenal for yourself. There's no appointment of a military commander in Torah, which is a staple, right, for any other empire. Like, you need a king, and the king needs the general, and here's how you have a standing military. But there is no standing military in Israel.
Yeah.
Like, there is, in all the censuses,
senseis,
you have members of each tribe, and then you have like the set apart people are the priests.
Yeah.
Right. You don't have in every tribe X number of people are set apart to fight and be a part of the king's army.
Right.
That's not a part of Israel's constitution.
Right.
They have no army.
Yep.
And so, and how nations generally build armies is by taking a census and numbering the people and figuring out a percentage, and then coming up with a way of taking that percentage and building the king's army, right? And for Israel, it wasn't even okay to take a census, because that was how you build a military. It is why you counted your people.
Yeah.
And Israel was anti-census. And so even when they go into the promised land, I find this really funny, and I don't have the passage in hand, but like God tells them to count up the people, but he makes pretty clear that this is so we can make sure that when we divide the land up, like a tribe of 20,000 doesn't get more land than a tribe of 50,000. Right? You want to have the land proportionally distributed. And Torah makes clear that's why Israel is taking that census. It's not so you can figure out who your army is. And God is so insistent that they don't take censuses that he makes them sacrifice an animal to atone for the sin of taking a census. Right? Yeah. Like, it's that big a deal. Even though God commands them to take it, you have to atone for taking it because you're not a census-taking people.
Exactly.
And so David's big sin that ends up really losing the kingship for him is when some adversary is provoking him, inciting him, and he decides to count his fighting men. He takes a census, and that brings God's swift judgment upon David, and David basically loses the kingdom from that point forward. Like, it's awful for that. So not only do you not have here provisions for having a standing army, like a king can't develop an arsenal and make trading partners with other nations. There's no military commander. If there is going to be a battle, and we, I don't know if we're going to read those verses, but basically what will happen is God will tap a priest on the hand, and the priest will blow the shofar or the horn, right? And then all the Israelites are to gather. And then God will say, now all the men go and do this.
Right.
So there's not a military class. There's not a group of people who are being trained in warfare or soldiery in any way, shape, or form. It's the spontaneous gathering of the whole community, not by the king, not by a general or any kind of military commander, but by the priests.
Yep.
Because the priests are the sacred guardians of blood.
Yeah.
And for Israel, warfare is a giant act of sacrifice. Right? It's treated like sacrifice, like blood is being shed, the sacred blood, people made in God's image. If God doesn't consecrate this battle, it's not okay to go into battle.
Yeah.
And God's not going to trust a king to consecrate a battle,
Right.
or someone who does training people for warfare for a living to choose whether we should go to war. The last people you want to ask, hey, should we go into battle, is someone who's been training for this their entire life. The answer is always yes.
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 But the priests are not eligible to go into battle. They may not go into battle because they're set apart. And those are the ones that God uses to actually declare that it's time for a battle. That's how you know. When someone who will never fight to the death, that's how you know this is from God and not just a trigger-happy general.
Yeah, it reminds me, speaking of July 4th, it reminds me a little bit of the Revolutionary War and like Minutemen who like, they weren't part of the army, but when they were called up, they hated the call for whatever, right?
Yep.
And so when you read Judges, that's the same thing that happens where someone comes and the judge like calls them like, it's time, guys, and they come running. Like they're not military men. They're people who are defending their homeland, or as God directs. And so it's just bizarre. Like when we talk about how violent and how, people always think of Joshua where they're going and conquesting, but after that, the army doesn't really exist. Of course, under David, he creates his mighty men, and maybe that
becomes his downfall.
Right. And it's amazing that I don't know, we're getting way off topic, but we hear a lot of, I hear from time to time, David and his mighty men, and they're like extolled that he has these men where he shouldn't have, is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Like the fact that he has these men who are his Green Beret team that he's calling up anytime he wants, or SEALs, like that's not what God wanted. They should be doing other things like farming and not going around and killing for him.
Yeah. Arguably, the whole story arc of David's life is a man who started out as a boy against Goliath. Like, I don't want the armor. I don't want the big sword. I have God who fights for me with this slingshot. Like that's how he starts out. He trusts God, and he regards life as sacred. Like even when Saul is trying to kill David, David refuses to take the life of Saul. Like he's not a violent killer man, but later in life, after he becomes king, the kingship starts settling in. He starts thinking like a king. He's building this army of, and arguably he had some of these mighty men when he was wandering around trying to be killed trying to avoid being killed by Saul. But anyway, he becomes someone who relies more and more on his army and his strength. And the census is really the culmination of that. Yeah. So like these fighting men are it's like a middle point between Slingshot Boy and taking a census to trust. Like the middle stage from Slingshot Boy to taking a census is surrounding himself by all these people who are his defense and his offense. Yeah. So his story is one of a decline into violence like the nations.
Yeah, and as you read the story, less and less does he go to look to God.
Yep.
He makes his own decisions, like you're talking about. He doesn't go to the priest and say, "Should we do this?" He just does it. Eventually, little by little.
Yeah. It starts out great. It's a total decline story. Yeah. Just like Saul, just like Solomon.
Yep. Exactly. Well, looks like we're butting up at the end of time. We got like a minute left, so we're gonna break here.
We're gonna break here. So. Yeah, well, thanks for joining us.
So somebody has to start the exit line there. So.
This episode of the After Class podcast, After Class because
the best conversations happen
after class.